There are roughly 4.4 million people currently collecting Social Security divorced spouse benefits, according to the SSA's 2024 statistical data. But here's what keeps me up at night. The SSA's own research suggests millions more are eligible and simply never claim. They either didn't know the benefit existed, or they claimed their own smaller retirement benefit early out of panic, which locked the door behind them. That single decision, filing too soon on the wrong record, can permanently cost a divorced woman in her early 60s tens of thousands of dollars over a 20-year retirement. And it's almost always avoidable if you know the rules before you file. So, let's talk about what the rule actually is, where people go wrong, and what the math looks like when you get it right. The foundation is simpler than most people expect. If you were married to someone for at least 10 years, and you're currently unmarried, you may be entitled to a Social Security benefit based on your ex-spouse's earnings record. Not a portion of what they're getting, a separate benefit calculated from their record that has no effect on what they receive. This surprises people almost every time I explain it. Your ex doesn't lose a dime. SSA pays your divorced spouse benefit entirely separately. Their check doesn't shrink, their family members aren't affected, and this is the part that catches people off guard. They don't even have to know you filed. The 10-year marriage rule is firm. 9 years and 11 months doesn't qualify. The SSA verifies this through marriage and divorce records, so you'll need documentation. But if you cross that threshold, the door opens, and it stays open regardless of whether your ex has remarried, regardless of how many times they've been married since, and regardless of what your relationship with them looks like today. You also need to be at least 62 years old to claim, and your ex-spouse needs to be at least 62 and eligible for Social Security retirement benefits, though they don't actually need to be collecting yet, as long as they've been divorced from you for at least 2 continuous years. That 2-year rule matters. If your divorce was finalized less than 2 years ago, you generally have to wait for your ex to actually begin collecting before you can file on their record. Most situations I've seen involve divorces that happened years or decades ago. This isn't usually the stumbling block, but it's worth knowing. Now, let's talk about the benefit amount, because this is where the math gets meaningful. The maximum divorced spouse benefit is 50% of your ex's primary insurance amount. That's the SSA's term for what they'd receive at their own full retirement age. If your ex's PIA is $2,800, for example, your maximum divorced spouse benefit is $1,400 per month. But that 50% ceiling only applies if you claim at your own full retirement age. If you file early, at 62 say, your benefit gets permanently reduced. At 62, you'd receive roughly 32.5% of your ex's PIA instead of 50%, according to SSA's reduction formula. On that same $2,800 example, it's $910 a month instead of $1,400. The gap between those two numbers, compounded over 20 years, is not a rounding error. Here's where individual circumstances change the picture. If your own retirement benefit at full retirement age is larger than 50% of your ex's PIA, you won't benefit from the divorced spouse rule. SSA pays the higher of the two, not both. But if your own work record is thin, maybe you took time out of the workforce to raise children, or you worked part-time for long stretches, the divorced spouse benefit can be substantially larger than your own earned benefit. I want to walk through a more complete example, because I think the numbers make this click better than any explanation. Suppose you're 63 right now. You were married for 14 years, divorced a decade ago, haven't remarried. Your own Social Security retirement benefit at full retirement age, 67 for anyone born in 1960 or later, would be $900 a month. Your ex-spouse's PIA is $3,200. 50% of $3,200 is $1,600. Because $1,600 is larger than your own $900, SSA will pay you based on your ex's record. If you wait until 67 to file, you get the full $1,600. If you file at 63, that number gets reduced. The reduction is roughly 25% for filing 4 years early, bringing you to around $1,200. Still more than your own record, but you've permanently left $400 a month on the table. Here's where I see people make the worst version of this mistake. They turn 62, they're anxious, they call SSA, they say, I want to file for Social Security, and SSA processes a claim on their own record, the smaller one, because that's what was asked for. The divorced spouse benefit doesn't automatically come up unless you specifically mention that you were married for 10 or more years, Honestly, I think the application process should surface this automatically, and it doesn't reliably do that. So you have to bring it up yourself. Now, there's a second piece to this that even people who know about divorced spouse benefits tend to overlook entirely, and that's divorced survivor benefits. These are different from the spouse benefit we've been discussing. If your ex-spouse dies before you and you were married for at least 10 years, you may be eligible for up to 100% of what they were receiving, not 50%. That's the full benefit, not the half. The eligibility rules shift a bit. You can collect divorced survivor benefits as early as age 60, or 50 if you're disabled. And crucially, the 10-year marriage requirement still applies, but the currently unmarried requirement has a carve-out. If you remarried after age 60, you can still qualify. The SSA's own publication on survivor benefits, which they update annually, lays out these thresholds clearly. The strategic implication of the survivor benefit changes how you should think about sequencing. Let me be direct about this. If your ex-spouse is older than you, in poor health, or has a significantly larger benefit than yours, the survivor benefit calculation should factor into when you file on your own record. Why? Because if you claim your own retirement benefit early and then your ex passes away, SSA can switch you to the survivor benefit, but only if your own benefit is lower. If you've already maximized your own benefit by waiting until 70 and the survivor benefit would be lower, there's no switch to make. On the other hand, if you file your own benefit early and then become eligible for a larger survivor benefit, SSA will pay you the higher of the two. The sequencing options here are genuinely worth modeling with actual numbers before you file anything. One more edge case that trips people up. What if your ex-spouse remarried and their new spouse is also collecting a spouse benefit? That doesn't reduce your benefit. The SSA pays each eligible claimant independently. Multiple ex-spouses can each receive up to 50% of the same earner's PIA simultaneously without any reduction to any of them. I know that sounds counterintuitive. It did to me the first time I looked at the rules, but it's confirmed in SSA's Program Operations Manual system, the internal rulebook SSA employees use. Your benefit is not a slice of a finite pie. It's a separately calculated amount. I focus on Social Security and retirement decisions for the 50-plus crowd, and the thing I see consistently is that people underestimate how much this one rule can shift their retirement math. According to the SSA's Office of the Inspector General, an estimated 82,000 widows and divorced survivors were underpaid or missed benefits entirely in a 2021 audit, not because they were ineligible, but because the claiming process didn't surface the entitlement. That number represents real people who left real money uncollected. So what's the actual move here? Before you file for any Social Security benefit, pull your Social Security statement. You can do it at ssa.gov in about 5 minutes with a My Social Security account. Then pull your ex-spouse's estimated benefit if you can. If you don't have access to that, call SSA directly and ask them to calculate what your divorced spouse benefit would be based on your marriage record. They can give you a figure before you commit to anything. Do not file on your own record first and ask questions later. That's the sequence that costs people money. Now, depending on your health, your other income sources, and how long you expect to live, your family history matters here more than most calculators account for. The right claiming age will vary. But the default position I'd start from is this. Wait until full retirement age if you can, apply for the divorced spouse benefit if it's larger than your own, and keep the survivor benefit in mind as a separate calculation. That's the framework I'd hand to a 58-year-old sitting across from me who just realized this benefit exists. I'm not a licensed financial advisor. This is general education, not personalized advice. Consult a fiduciary before acting. If this changed how you're thinking about your Social Security options, subscribe. There's a lot more to unpack in this series. Next week, I'm getting into IRA catch-up contributions, and there's actually a change that took effect for 2026 that most people haven't heard about yet. The catch-up limit at age 50 quietly increased, and if you're in that window, it's worth knowing before you set your contribution for the year. If there's a specific Social Security question you've been sitting with, something about your own situation that hasn't been answered yet, drop it in the comments. I read them, and I work the good ones into upcoming videos. This video may contain affiliate links. I only recommend tools I use personally.